Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.71, and in this lesson we're going to take a bit of a deeper look into the matrix and also talk about some classic algorithms that you would find on a synthesizer like, say, the DX7. The DX7 had hardwired algorithms as to how the various operators would function inside of that synthesizer. What would be a carrier, what would be a modulator, what could you possibly frequency modulate itself, like what operators or carriers could also be modulated by themselves, all those sorts of things. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. So let's go ahead and set something up very simple here so we can get some sound coming out of this guy. All right, perfect. Now we know if I turn on number 1, now this is going to act more as an operator, and it could become a modulator if it wanted to. And in this case, all we could do is modulate operator 1 by itself, assuming my modulation depth is up. We can do that like so. Now, the cool thing is if I turn on number 2 here, just to act as a carrier, we can hear that coming on. Now, I can use operator 1 here to both modulate number 1, but I could also now use it to modulate number 2. So how would I do that? Well, we have to remember how we're reading this. It works horizontally in rows. So if I'm changing something here that's happening 1 to 1, if I try to go 2 to 1, right now that's not going to do anything because this isn't turned on as a modulator. But we know that operator 1 is turned on as a modulator. And I could go here now to row 2 and say, okay, this is corresponding to 2, and I want it to be modulated by number 1. So to do that, that's all I'd have to do, and I could evoke a little bit of both here. And now if I was to add an envelope generator on here, it's going to correspond to both of these values. All right, so that's pretty significant. If I just go ahead and pull this up to 1. Okay, like so. Now, you can do so many complicated things in here. It's really just up to your imagination. And that's why I really love this synthesizer, because it's about you just kind of going in here, being creative, and hearing the sort of complex waveforms and patches that you can come up with. So as an example, we can do something really basic to start. I'll turn all of these on as modulators, but I only want to have one carrier. That carrier is going to be operator number 1. And now if I want, I can evoke a bit of FM on all of these guys. If I just turn these up to some different ratios here, we'll keep it simple at octaves. Let's turn them all up to start. And now if I wanted, I could give each of these independent modulation controls. Envelopes, if you will. All right, that works for me. Maybe we'll have this one be a little bit different and just come in at the strike. So we'll use 4. Maybe a tiny bit of attack. Very cool. And let's also come up with something for number 3, maybe somewhere in the middle with a very high sustain and a pretty quick decay. Why not? you can hear kind of the variations you get, especially as we start to play different sort of intervals and relationships on the keyboard. But that's just one example of something that we've set up. Now, the common way you're going to see these is like this with block diagrams. And this was what was on the old DX7. These are actually the exact same algorithms. And we can see that the DX7 had 6 operators as compared to 4, but we can kind of evoke some of the same things if we just ignore 5 and 6 here. So let's look at 1. What this is saying is that 2 is operating as a modulator onto 1, which is a carrier. 3 is also a carrier, and that's being modulated by 4. So let's see if we can set that up. It shouldn't be too difficult for us to do. I'll just start over on a new patch here. And we know that 1 and 3 are both going to act as carriers. So now we just have to set those relative levels as to something that we'd like. So I'll use the first one as 1, and on this one I'll set it to, let's set it to 3 and slightly put it out of tune. All right, and we know that 1 can be frequency modulated by number 2. So let's go ahead and set that up now. And we'll decide on something. Maybe we'll use 2 here. Slightly put that out as well. Let's use 1.996. And then we want to have number 3 modulated by 4. So I need to go here to my 3rd row, and I'm going to go over to 4. And let's set something here too. Why not set 6? That will work well. Maybe we'll go 6.002. Feel free to experiment with some detuning, either subtle or extreme. So there you go. That's kind of one example of setting up a classic algorithm, even though we only have 4 and what we really need is 6. But you can go in here, you can experiment, you can try as many combinations as you want, and you can always go really crazy with it. Another kind of classic example that gets done a lot is to use 1 as our carrier, and then 2, 3, and 4 are all going to act as modulators, but they're going to act as modulators in a bit of a different way. So I'm going to start to evoke a little bit of frequency modulation here. Turn this guy off. All right, we can hear that like so, but now what I want to do is have operator 3 modulate, frequency modulate operator number 2. All right, remember, all of the levels are down here, but this is still possible. So what I need to do is go down to 2 and move up to 3. All right, so now 3 has this relationship to 2, this 3 to 2, as compared to 3 to 1. We can hear that difference in timbre right away. So do keep that in mind. And then if I want number 3 to be modulated by 4, I could go all the way here into the matrix, go down 3, over to number 4. And now this is where it really gets crazy. This is where it becomes nuanced, because every little slight change I make here is going to have a big impact on this, but it's also going to have a big impact here. Okay, because each of these now are related to one another. So every single little change I make will drastically impact the sound. If this is down at 0, this has no effect. All right, because it's trying to feed into number 3. So there needs to be some amount of depth here. So if I set this to something really, really low, even if I crank these values all the way up, it's so much more subtle than if I have this cranked up. And then I start to impart some changes. So I think frequency modulation isn't very difficult in terms of what's happening in the logic of it, but dialing in settings that work for what you're going for, that can always be a bit of a challenge. So feel free to go in, I'll link to this in the description. Take a look at some of these and see if you can come up with things that work. Just ignore 5 and 6. I'll walk through one more with you. Let's do 17. This one's a bit more interesting. So it looks like 1 is our only carrier here. We have 2 modulating 1. We also have 3 modulating 1, but 4 is modulating 3, and 2 can modulate itself. All right, so this seems kind of confusing, but we'll set it up, and I'll go back and look at this to check at the end. So 1 is our only carrier, and we're going to be using 2, 3, and 4. And let's set up the easy one first. So we can see that 2 is going to modulate 1. Like so, but 2 also has the ability to self-modulate. So we can add some of that self-modulation in right here. Again, I'm going 2 and 2. So we're really messing with 2 in itself, but 2 is not a carrier, so it's going to be basing it off of the depth we set here. So if we set this to just 10, and then crank that up, so much different from that. Okay, so we have that one all cooked and ready to go. Now we can see that we have 3 modulating 1. So let's set that up real quick. 3 modulating 1. Perfect. But then we also have, let's see, 4 modulating 3. So what I'll do is I'll go down to 4, head over to 3. Awesome. And again, this is relative to whatever we set here. So if we crank this way up and then pull this up, it's going to get crazy real quick. And we'll see that if we really cook some of these settings and we pull some of these a little bit out, you can see how coming up with something like a growl bass is very simple. And take a look at this spectrum. Totally wild right there. We're not using any filters. We could then go in here and perhaps change all of these guys. And let's do something really fun. Let's pull this up and have this actually pull this down over time. And this one will add a bit in here. All right, so let's start to now change these envelopes. Doesn't matter, we don't have any release on this patch. All right. Awesome. So you can see the sort of crazy things that we can come up with there, and that's just one example. There are millions and millions more that you guys can kind of tap into on your own. Hope that was helpful, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.